Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Good? Yeah. It's like, that's me this week. Like today, that's me. So I'll just admit it, right? So someone tell me something good this week. Something that good that's happened for your business this week. You guys. Okay, I'll give you a good. The waiver was approved by the state for family childcare homes today, right? So starting on the 15th, if you're a family childcare home, you can move to 2 under 2 instead of two under 18 months instead of 2 under 2, which is pretty exciting, right? So
Yes.
yes. Children's like, yeah. So that's pretty good. That's good news. Anyone else have some good news about business this week?
We heard some good news, Dawn, that will be good news for everyone in their business, that you can now get points towards your PDIS or your rating in PDIS by having a consultation with Dawn. So we wanted you to do that anyways, and now you get extra points for it. So I'd say that's pretty great for your business.
Do they keep giving you points the more you have with her?
So you can get, I think it was 1 point for 3 hours and was it, yeah, 3 hours and then 2 points for 4 and up, I think is what it was. Sounds about that. I can check into all of that. And then I could do a coaching log with you for that you could upload into PDIS. So, and we know how expensive that is through the SBDC, right? Oh, this perk for you is the same cost as all the rest. It costs you absolutely nothing. So really think about that. I know we're in December and nobody wants to think about adding anything to their plate right now, and that's okay, right? But when you come back in the new year, really think about, okay, what are you attacking with your business? What are you going to be working on? If you want some support in that, just schedule consults with me. I'm going to make sure to have my schedules to Hannah more efficiently than what I've done in the past. I get a few days into the month and I'm like, oh, schedule, send it. Right. So I'll probably be doing that a little more proactively with her and adding a lot more times so that I have some availability options for you guys. So look for that, especially in January when you're coming back with your new goals for 2022 with your positive outlook for what's coming next year, right? So that would be good. What kind of questions have you guys run into this week?
I just want to share that I did have another consultation with
Good.
marketing, and it was an hour
Good.
to the T, and
Uh-huh.
I was exhausted afterwards. I was high. It was unbelievable. I just kept taking sloppy notes so fast. And then, oh, my arms were I was exhausted. But I've gone through every single note. I've either changed something, and he told me two things that were so valuable. So
Good.
I have the longest email in the world, and I have to spell it out. And he showed me a way of getting around that. And
There you go.
it was huge. It was
And
huge.
that's the beauty of what you get to do through the SBDC, right? You get to take your specific stuff to someone who specializes in that and really just say, okay, help me to look at this through your lens and give me some feedback, right? And that's a pretty powerful thing because why should you have to learn how to do it all, right? You all think you have to do it all. Stop that. Start using your tools in your tool chest and take some of that stress and pressure off of you so that you can do that. Let's see here. Okay, so yeah, use those tools, think efficiently, think about how to make things easier for yourself. Look, we know how hard things have been, right? You want to see how hard things are? Let me see here. So I sent out a survey this morning, and can I screen share real quick, Hannah?
Yeah, 1 second.
So I sent out a screen share because I'm sent screen share. Oh, I can't think tonight. I sent out a survey earlier today because I keep hearing from people that they're at risk of closing, right? That they're trying to find ways to hang on, and they're really struggling with that. I was going to pull data from the state's data sources. And so I compared October to November, and I used my new Excel skills to like highlight the unique values in the spreadsheet. So I knew in the October lane, if it was highlighted, that was a closure because they were not in the November list, right? And then I looked at the November list and knew that those were new programs because they were not in the October list. But as I started looking at those new programs, I noticed, that one's been open for 1.5 years. That one's been open for 9 months. That one's been bad data, right? So I could not tell you from that data source how many programs opened or closed last month. So we turned to just doing a survey. And so here's what we came across. Let's see here. All right, screen share. Sorry, guys. Let's see here. Screen share. So sent out the survey this morning and we've already had 142 responses. 43.7 of those respondents are saying that yes, they're currently at risk of closing and gave reasons why. And then if you're considering closing your doors, how many are looking at, I think one person is looking at let's see here, in the next couple weeks, 5 by the end of this year and 39 in January. So about half of these are really, really feeling the pressure to close. Looked at capacity, and then how many people went into business debt? 44%, 44.4 went into business debt since October 1st, and 50.7% took on personal debt since October 1. And when you talk about the debt amounts, they're not inconsequential numbers, right? So that's what's happening out there. And that's what we're going to elevate with OEC. I think they're aware that there's already a survey out there because today it was as early as possible in January instead of the end of January, which is what we were hearing, right? And so we'll make sure that everybody gets to see the survey results, and hopefully it'll help to affect some change for you guys sooner rather than later. Anyhow, let's see. Is Sam here yet, or what time's Sam coming? You're here.
Yes,
Hi, Sam.
Hi, I'm here. I was enjoying the survey result.
Got a little tour there. So
I thought those were great.
tonight is a great thing because really we want you to sit back and look at your legal structure and to also make sure that you're covered with the right insurance coverage, right? Because those two things have the ability to make or break you. And so Sam is going to give you a lot of details about various formations of business and ways to protect those business structures. So go for it. Thanks for
Awesome.
coming.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. What time is insurance coming in? Just so I can keep an eye on myself.
Yeah, Katie is coming at 7:30.
Awesome. Perfect. So that's always good because Hannah knows. Hannah's seen me do this and many other programs a number of times. I get really excited with you guys, and I can absolutely stretch a 10-minute presentation into an hour when we're on a good roll and when people have good questions. So I want to make sure that you guys have time to do everything you need to do tonight. So if I do start kind of speeding through some stuff, or if I do start kind of making sure that we're skipping across, no, let me switch this. Skipping across a few things, I will send this to Hannah. You guys will have this. I'm just trying to make sure that you guys get time for everything you're wanting to do tonight. So I guess to introduce myself a little bit first, my name's Samantha Brown. I do business as Samantha Peasley because that's what I started working under. And I'm with Polaris Law Group. So we are a small business that serves as general counsel for small businesses. So we've gone through a lot of the things that small businesses have gone through, and kind of use that knowledge as well as our legal knowledge to help small businesses through things. And tonight we're going to kind of talk about primarily structure, but then and then how you protect yourself within those structures, but then also just a couple little extra writings that I think are important for childcare providers to be aware of and to know how they can add those extra protections in for themselves. So this is a very basic 101 as far as that goes. My legal disclaimer is none of this is legal advice. There's always going to be some personal situations that may change what's going on with you at any point in time. I do give free consultations through the SBDC. And so if you guys have a personal situation you want to talk through after this, you can reach out to Hannah. She'll get you on my SBDC calendar. That's not a problem. And so if you're listening to stuff like this and you're like, I kind of want to talk that through, feel free to reach out. Happy to do that. And then I also do want to point out that yeah, super expensive, $0. Thanks, Dawn. It's very good price. I do make a couple of tax statements in this, not too many, but I know about as much tax to know how to do this presentation. And after that, I rely very heavily on our SBDC accountants. So to the point where I do say in these that these are questions for the accountants. Same thing, very, expensive price as far as getting in those accounting consulting. But this is one of those team efforts. So don't try and do this alone. So now that the boring disclaimers are done, let's get into it. So I guess first kind of show of hands, who already has a legal entity? Who's already set one up for your childcare? All right, it's a trick question. You all do. If any of you have done any work so far, you have set up a legal entity. Just some of you have taken a few more steps than other ones. So when we talk about entity choices, we do talk about two different types. We talk about legal entity choices and then also your tax entity choices. Why? You'll notice these two columns do not look identical. They're a little bit different. So legally, you have these entity choices. You can be a sole proprietorship. That's just one of you. You can be a partnership, and there are 4 different kinds of partnerships in there. And we'll go into more depth on what each of these things mean. But typically, we're going to be talking about a general partnership, but there might be some other kinds in there. Limited liability company. That's the popular one, especially for small businesses. And then a corporation, which can be organized as what we call a C corporation or an S corporation. I don't include on here things like not-for-profits and associations, because typically when we're talking about childcare providers, these are the ones we're talking about. But if you know that you kind of fit into one of those special exceptions, we can always chat offline about those ones. But these are for this industry, kind of the best ones to be looking at. But look over that tax side. These are different. So the legal side is what you tell the Secretary of State that you are, and it's what you get legal protections for. The tax side is what you tell the IRS and the Department of Revenue that you are. So these are a little different. You'll see Schedule C. Well, that covers that sole proprietorship or a single member LLC. You'll see partnership without the kind of listing of the different types of that. And then you'll see S corporation and C corporation. But note that there's no LLC in this column, even though we say under Schedule C, you could be a single member LLC. An LLC, a limited liability company, does not exist with the IRS. They recognize that it exists with various states, but it is not a thing with them. So when you choose to be an LLC legally, you choose to be either a Schedule C, a partnership, or an S corporation for tax purposes. So for example, my business at Polaris Law Group is a limited liability company taxed as an S corporation. Plenty of people start out as a limited liability company taxed as a sole proprietorship. So if you know that you've got that limited liability company, you know that you're going to have that taxed as suffix on there. And we'll talk a little bit more about what each of these things mean. But so far, those are kind of the legal entities we're talking about. Those are the tax entities. So let's jump in. And I'll take questions kind of as we go through, but right now I know you're going to have a ton of questions about these, and I think we'll cover these a little more in depth on these next slides. So first of all, sole proprietorship. When I asked the question, raise your hand who has an entity. And some of you did, some of you didn't. The ones who didn't, you're probably a sole proprietorship. When we're looking at the type of entities, you'll notice on each of the slides, we're going to have 3 different categories. We're going to have formalities, meaning what do you have to do to be that kind of entity? Liabilities, how much risk are you taking on as that kind of entity? And taxes, what does your tax situation look like as that kind of entity? Looking at these 3 categories, you get a good idea of what kind of entity you should be. What is the best fit for you? A lot of people pick an entity because they're told that this is a good idea, or they heard about it online, or somebody said that they should be this. That's not the best way to choose the entity. The best way to choose the entity is to really look at the formalities you have to do, the liabilities you'll be taking on, and the taxes you have to pay, and to pick your best fit. But if you've already chosen an entity and you haven't done that, no worries. It's often easy to switch, or we can see if you are the right fit and have you understand what that choice really means. So sole proprietorship, that's the easy one. Why? Look at all these no's and formalities. No organizational documents necessary, no EIN necessary, unless you're hiring employees. All the management is in one person. Basically, the second that I start selling mittens on Etsy, I'm a sole proprietorship. If I am a 10-year-old at a lemonade stand, I am a sole proprietorship. So that means that if you've been taking in money for services and you don't have anything filed with the Secretary of State and it's just you, you're a sole proprietorship because you don't have to do anything to be a sole proprietorship. Once you're doing that, you're a business. Now, the risk of sole proprietorship is you and your company, one and the same. You are exactly identical. That means that you have full liability for what goes on in your sole proprietorship. So if you're watching a child who falls in the backyard off the tree and you don't have enough in your company to cover medical expenses and your insurance refuses to cover it, that's coming out of your house, that's coming out of your car, that's coming out of your savings, that's coming out of your kids' savings. You are 100% responsible. That also means the only access to capital you have is through loans, which can be a limiting factor, as we kind of saw through Dawn's survey. So that means you don't have the help from other partners. The second you have another partner, you're not a sole proprietorship anymore. You can't have investors, none of those fun things. So, and then finally, taxes are easy. No separate business tax. You just do both things together. You may be subject to some self-employment taxes, but taxes are easy. No extra forms to file. So nice and simple. Sole proprietorship. There it is. Any questions about a sole proprietorship before we move on to how a partnership is a little different from this? Right, not seeing any. If anybody has some later, feel free to chime in, put them in the chat, or just call out because I can't see everyone at once while this is up. So then we have a partnership. Now, a partnership is a sole proprietorship plus another person. So if you have somebody who you're working with, That's going to be a partnership. A lot of times spouses will become accidental business partners, good friends. Basically, a partnership is like a sole proprietorship. No such thing, nothing with taxes is easy. Fair, but it's easier than some. Good point. So when you're a partnership, you share management. Everything is equal unless you have a partnership agreement that says otherwise. You don't have to have a partnership agreement to be a partnership. No EIN is required. You have to do consensus on everything. Basically, once two people start working together without any sort of agreement, you're a partnership. So there's lots of accidental partnerships out there because they're not a contractor, they're not an employee, you're working together, you're splitting the money, boom, now you have a legal partnership. Why might that not be great? Well, remember we said sole proprietor, you're one and the same. Partnership, you're also one and the same with the company and that other person. So it's what's called joint and several liability. So little Susie falls off the tree in the backyard. Let's say her hospital bills are $20,000. And you've been working with your good friend Dawn, who hears the $20,000 and she knows she doesn't have any money. Her only money is this car that is her prized possession. She's been taking care of it for years. And so she hears the $20,000. Your company only has $5,000. She panics and she takes her precious car and she goes off to Canada. Well, so that's $15,000 that little Susie needs to get paid. Shouldn't you only pay $7,500 and then they have to go find Dawn in Canada? No. Joint and several liability means you have to pay all the $15,000. Then it's up to you to go find Dawn and get that back from her. So that's joint and several.
Keeping you high and dry, but maybe you should rethink the partnership thing.
And I can pick on Dawn because I know Dawn would never do this. So it's always fun to pick on your host of your class a little bit with these scenarios. But yeah, so partnerships, especially ones without agreements, automatic partnerships, have joint and several liability. But you have more access to capital because you have both partners who are contributing in, both partners get access to credit, both partners are signing on to personal guarantees. That can lead to a lot more opportunities to get funding into the company. But you have to remember that anybody investing with you becomes a partner. So if you get $10,000 from your parents to help you out, now mom and dad are partners, they have that joint several liability. As much as we love mom and dad, we don't really want them shouldering that. So the taxes on these are a little more complex than a sole proprietorship. They're divided amongst the partners, still subject to that self-employment tax. The exception for that is if you do a limited partnership, the limited partners who are the ones who have limited liability will not be subject to that same tax. So if you have a partnership agreement, you can create a limited partnership. We saw all those different kinds. That's when one partner has joint and several liability, and one partner always has to. And then the other partner has limited liability, meaning that they're considered separate from the company. So if you have a partnership agreement and mom and dad are giving you $10,000 to help keep your company going, and you agree to a limited partnership agreement, you still have joint and several liability. You're still 100% liable with the company, but you can make an agreement where if little Susie falls off the tree, the only thing that your parents are responsible for as limited partners is going to be losing their investment. So they won't get their investment back, but they won't be responsible for anything else. And they're also going to have better tax treatment there. That's kind of partnerships. It's that step above sole proprietorship. You can have some rules and regulations in it, but it's sort of the automatic for if there's two or more people working together in a company. And I will tell you as an attorney, when people say partners and are throwing partners around for corporations and LLCs, it makes me do this because we don't like this for our clients. It scares us a lot. We don't want any of you guys stuck holding that bag when Dawn runs off to Canada. So, so any questions about partnerships or partnerships, difference between those and sole proprietorships?
I will say Canada sounded pretty good today, so.
It did. There are some pros, but all right. So now we're going to skip an LLC for a second, and we're going to jump straight up to those corporations. We'll come back to the LLC. But first we're going to talk about an S corporation. So S corporation is sometimes called a closely held corporation. This is a special corporation that was set up for people who wanted more protection than partnerships allowed, but didn't have the kind of time and money to be putting together a C corporation, which we're going to see in a little bit. So an S corporation was designed for families or groups of 3 to 5 who are coming together to build a company, but need that little bit extra liability protection. But as we'll see here, much longer row, there are some extra formalities that come with an S corporation. So if you're a legal S corporation, you have to have a board of directors. Okay, that means that you are giving some decision-making authority over to another person. That isn't actually as much of a pain for childcare organizations as for some other organizations, because you have a lot of decision-making rules and regulations over you anyway. But you are needing to bring in other people who you trust and who are going to have some authority over what happens in your company. And that's a lot. You also have to have more documentation with an S corporation. So you have to have bylaws, you have to have meeting minutes, and we're going to go through some of the corporation and LLC documentation a little bit later. But you have to track many more things with paperwork. Annual meetings are the big ones, and bylaws. You may have requirements with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. What is that? It's a large federal organization similar to the IRS, but that regulates people's interest in companies and in corporations, and it's designed to protect people. So if you're an S corporation and you're taking money in from people, you have to look very carefully at who's giving you that money. And if it doesn't fit into one of the special categories, so like family or somebody who's working very closely in the company, or what we call an accredited investor, you're going to have to file paperwork with the SEC before they can give you that money, unless it's a loan. So you have some limitations there and some extra paperwork that you have to do. And then an S corporation, because they designed it to be less arduous than a C corporation, has some restrictions. An S corporation has to be fewer than 100 shareholders, which I'm sure a lot of you are going, yeah, I'm never getting there. That seems ridiculous to most of us. And like I said, S corporations were really designed for like 3 to 5. So a lot of S corporations don't get that high. No aliens. You have to be a US resident in order to be a member of an S corporation. And only real people. That means you can't have another organization be an owner of an S corporation. So it has to be real individuals. Those are kind of those formalities. Very different from what we just saw with the sole proprietor and partnership, isn't it? A lot more that you have to do there. But the benefits are, instead of being like this, you're here and the company's here, and each of you who are members are way over here. And those formalities serve as walls between the shareholders or the members of the corporation and the corporation itself. So we call that limited liability. Why is it limited? It's limited to you losing your investment in the company and any personal responsibility for actions that you have taken. So, and as long as you're acting in the best interest of the company and good faith. So if Susie fell out of the tree and you were doing everything that you were supposed to, you were acting in good faith, you weren't acting against the interest of the company, and you've put $10,000 of your own money into this company, you're not going to get that money back if the company goes under because Susie fell out of the tree. But your house is safe, your car is safe, they can't come after you personally. The exception on that, and this is where that personal liability comes in, is if you were drinking on the job, and that's why Susie fell out of the tree, that's going to be called personal liability. That has nothing to do with you as an owner of the company. You're going to be responsible for a different reason. So it doesn't protect you from that. But if you were doing your absolute best and kids will be kids and, you know, she just got away from you for a second, you're not going to be responsible. So that's the benefit of having that S corporation, is much more protection. But, and so then you're still going to have pass-through taxes, meaning that you're not going to get double taxed on them. You only get taxed when it comes down to you as the owner, but you must have at least one W-2 employee on payroll, and that's usually you. That salary might be subject to a self-employment tax if the W-2 employee is not you. Distributions will not be subject to a self-employment tax. So you're starting to have more tax responsibilities here. You're going to have to file a separate set of tax forms for the corporation. It's called a 1120S, 1120K, 1120S, I think. And so you're going to have to do more tax filings than you would with a partnership or a sole proprietorship, but you're not getting double taxed yet. And you do also now have W-2 obligations, which you don't have as a sole proprietor or partnership. So that's kind of what an S corporation looks like. Little more work, little more protection. I notice that as a theme. Any questions on S corporations? Great, I'm crystal clear tonight. Everyone's getting everything. So then we have a C corporation. Almost skipped past that. C corporation is the full classic corporation. Formalities, I didn't list everything on here. Boards of directors, you basically have to write down everything you do. You have to have officers. You have to have quarterly meetings for your directors. You have to have at least annual meeting for your shareholders. You're likely to have those same SEC requirements that you had previously. And then your taxes, now you're going to get taxed twice. And so you're first going to get taxed. The corporation itself is going to get taxed on your profit when it comes in. And then when the profit gets paid out to the members, it's going to get taxed again. Your bylaws are more thorough. There's a lot more that needs to be included in there, but it is the best liability, or the best limitation of liability that you can get. It is completely separate from the owners. It is very hard to get to the owners there, but you're spending a lot of money and time to get that protection. So typically, if you're with the Small Business Development Center, there are very few situations in which we'll be recommending a C corporation, but it is kind of that gold standard of protection. It just comes at a very big cost. Okay, so then why do we save the LLC? LLC is the choose your own adventure of organizations. Basically, about 20-ish, maybe 30 years ago, somebody said, okay, yeah, the closely held corporation is nice. That's still a lot of work. Let's see if we can have something even better. And so they came up with a limited liability company. Like we said, the IRS doesn't recognize it. And that's kind of part of why this is choose your own adventure. You don't have to have a board of directors. You can choose whether the members are going to make decisions together, like a partnership or a sole proprietorship if there's only one member, or whether you elect a manager who kind of acts like a single board of directors there. So you can choose how you're going to manage your company. You need some documents, and we're about to go into what those are, but really we call it 4 walls for a limited liability company to get that separation there that you get with the S corporation. Operating agreement, your filings with the Colorado Secretary of State, annual meetings, and then keeping your finances separate. So keeping personal and business separate. If you're using the company like your personal bank account, you're not going to be treated like an LLC. You can't do that. And a lot of places will require LLCs to have EINs. It's not legally strictly required, but functionally it ends up being a requirement. You get to choose how you vote and how you make decisions, whether it's easy or hard. You still may have some SEC considerations if you get those third parties in here, but it's much less likely that you're going to have them. And then the privilege that you get is that limited liability for managers, members, and officers. And you get the benefit of, you get access to capital. You can have investors come in. and be lesser members. You can get loans, you can have multiple partners coming in and just have these agreements. And then you get to decide, well, do we want to be taxed like a sole proprietorship or a partnership so that there's fewer tax documents to do there? Or do we really want to start taking a W-2 salary so that we can show an income for ourselves? And therefore, do we want to be taxed like an S corporation? You get to decide which one of those is the best for your company. So this is why a lot of folks end up choosing that limited liability company. And that's the secondary tax portion there. A lot of people just don't realize that's why they choose a limited liability company, but it is a really good choice for a lot of smaller companies that need protection like childcare organizations do. But before making the decision, you should always talk to your accountant and attorney before deciding which kind to be, as well as deciding how you're going to get paid under those structures. So that's the types of structures. Before we jump into how to get those protections, those great liability things we talked about, any questions on the types of structures? Quiet, it's December, isn't it? Oh, go ahead, Jill.
One person can be LLC.
You can have a single member LLC, yes.
Oh,
So-
good.
Yep. Then you're going to be a LLC taxed as a sole proprietor. But a single member you can also have a single member S corporation or C corporation, although I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. But you still have to follow the formalities, even if you're a single member.
Hey, Sam,
Yeah.
question there. Are there other emerging structures that might come into play in Colorado, like social benefit corporations? I hear about these things, but I know it's at the state level that matters.
Sure. So public benefit, great question. First of all, co-ops are super trendy in Colorado, but I don't think that's going to be a thing in the childcare industry for a while. I don't think it's a good fit. And I haven't really seen anyone trying to do it. Social benefit corporations, public benefit corporations, you can do. Public benefit corporations has actually been around for a while, and they got really trendy lately. Basically, what you're doing with a public benefit corporation or a public benefit LLC is normally the company has an obligation to its members or shareholders, so members for an LLC, shareholders for a corporation, to maximize their profit while fulfilling the business purpose. So that's kind of a standard, and that's a legal obligation. So social benefit corporations, public benefit corporations, allow a company to write into their organizing documents that they have a social mission as well. They're not a not-for-profit, not all of their money will go to that, but that no one can hold the members, officers, or managers liable if the company is reinvesting towards that particular social mission or public mission. So let's say that you were a childcare organization that was focused on, let's say, providing a job opportunities for local individuals who are minority or female, and that was your public mission, that you're wanting to provide sustainable work in your community for that reason, and you wrote that into your foundational documents, and you could say, and therefore, we can further that. Well, then let's say that you have 3 members, and that 2 of the members want to give like a special scholarship towards, or to employ some people from the community at your facility for more than what you could reasonably pay them normally, and that it will cut into your profits to create that fund. The third person couldn't bring any action against them because that supports your benefit. So you can absolutely do that with that one small change. It's a small change with the Secretary of State. It's a small change within your foundational documents, but that was a great question. That's a really good trendy one coming up. That really doesn't change much legally. It's been allowed for a very long time, and it's getting a lot of attention right now, which is a positive.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Did that answer your question on that one?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for asking it. That's a great one. Great. Well, then that's a good segue into our formalities, actually. So we talked a little bit about why we want formalities on each of those, but it's important to reiterate that if you don't follow the formalities for your chosen structure, you're going to be deemed to be a sole proprietorship or a partnership, which means you're going to have full liability. So if you dress up like a duck and you say I'm a duck, but you otherwise continue acting like a human, you talk like a human, you eat like a human, you sleep in a bed like a human, do you think anybody is going to actually treat you like a duck? Same thing. So if you say I'm an LLC, but you don't act like an LLC because you're not doing the formalities, when push comes to shove, you're not going to be treated like an LLC. You're going to be treated like a sole proprietorship or a partnership. This doesn't come up a lot because it really only becomes relevant in 3 different circumstances. And this is if Susie's parents sue you. So if somebody sues you, it comes up if you want to sell the company. It might impede your ability to sell the company. It might impede the price that you get for selling your company, because they're saying, well, I'd be stuck with all of the liabilities from your last 20 years. I don't want that. Or third, when you want a loan. Sometimes the bank will say, we're only going to loan to you if you're an LLC. Well, I don't have an operating agreement. Okay, then you need to call Sam. And I have actually had bank lenders call my office and say, I have somebody in my office who would like a loan and they're frustrated that I'm not giving them one because they don't have an operating agreement. Can you explain to them why they need an operating agreement? So some of you might have run into that, but oftentimes if you wait until then it might be too late to get the results you want. Obviously, if you get the bank loan, they say you need an operating agreement. That's usually a pretty easy thing to fix. Sale, not so much, and the suing, not so much. So we want to make sure that you are what you say you are. And these are those 4 ways for an LLC. Now, we said with a corporation, you have many more. Well, S corporation, a few more. C corporation, many more. But they're going to be variations on a theme. So they're going to be very similar to this. So Secretary of State filings, that's the one everybody gets right. So you got to do that first one, and then you got to keep them up to date. But always make sure to look at the naming requirements. That's the part of those that people get wrong. Making sure that you are telling the state you are what you say you are. An operating agreement, which we talked about a bit with that benefit, but we're about to talk about more in depth. Annual or more regular, at least annual meeting minutes that show this goes, Jill, where you were asking if you're a sole member, if you can still be an LLC. Yes, but we still want to show you're making decisions like you're an LLC, not like you're by yourself. And so those meeting minutes show that you're really thinking through those decisions. You're not going through it as if you're deciding what to make for dinner that night. No, that's on sale and that looks good. You're actually sitting down thinking about it. And so those meeting minutes help with that. And we said separate bank accounts, no transferring money just for the sake of transferring money. You need to know what it's for, why you're doing this, what rules allow you to do this. So what goes in an operating agreement? What is an operating agreement? An operating agreement is a contract between the company and the members of the company. So if it's just one of you, operating agreement is a contract between you and your company, between Samantha Brown and Polaris Law Group. And we're agreeing how to run the company. We're agreeing what the rules are for our day-to-day running of the company. So some things that should go in there: how to vote. Does everything need to be unanimous? Well, if it's just one of you, then that's a pretty easy answer on that. And as well as, when do you need written decisions for those votes? So sometimes I say, if you're spending money that you would normally spend in a day-to-day basis, you probably don't need to write that down. But if you're about to spend $1,000 on a new computer, you might want to do some thinking. You might want to do some research on that computer. Then you might want to say, I did some research. This is the best price for a computer that I found with the needs that I have. I made the determination that I can spend this $1,000, but I'm going to wait until April because that's when I think this makes the most sense tax-wise. So not just how to vote, but when you need to write those decisions down. How to bring in new members. What if you do want to get money from your parents and they want to support you in that? What if you've been working really well with this other childcare organization? You guys want to collaborate. How do you do that? What do they need to bring in? Do they need to be working with you for 6 months first? Do they need to be bringing in an investment? Do they need to be bringing in clients? What kind of rules do you have for that? Similar, how can members leave? And I also have exit strategy on here and what happens if something happens to you, because this is important enough that I write it in 3 different ways because I really, really, really want to get this across. How do you leave voluntarily? Meaning, how do you retire? Or what if there's a couple of you working together and one of you just doesn't want to do it anymore? If you're working with a spouse or life partner, what if you get a divorce? That should go in there. What happens to the company then? What happens to the kids? Not your real life kids, your kids, your kids' kids. What if you get COVID tomorrow and you can't work for 6 weeks? Do you have a backup person? So we're talking about, this is a great time to make friends in your industry. Friends in your industry are a wonderful, wonderful thing. Why? Because if something happens to you that's a short, long-term problem, meaning it's a short-term problem in that it's not permanent, but it's long-term in that you can't just call everybody and say, I'm out for a couple of days, or use your normal substitutes. This might be where you work with somebody who you've made friends with in the industry, who's close to you, and you have plans for how some of those functions are taken over. Maybe they help with their substitutes. Maybe they help make sure that you're covered for a couple of weeks. Maybe you do have good teachers who can just cover everything for you. That's fantastic. Those should go in the operating agreement, those plans. Organizational structure. Do you want officers? Do you want somebody to be able to help you with your finances? Do you want an office manager? Are you getting big enough, or are you big enough that you need help around the office and you need somebody who has authority to call the bank on your behalf? That's where you designate officers. And those officers are acting on the authority of the company. But you want to be deliberate about how you do that. And so you want to identify that organizational structure in your operating agreement. Here's a big one that a lot of people forget about. How are you paying yourself? Is everybody here paying themselves? I know that survey makes it look like things are a little bit tough. It's really important that you pay yourself. And so how do you distribute that profit? How are you paying yourself? If you're in a rough spot, or if you don't know, even a rule like once a year at my annual meeting, I will take a look at my profit for the year. And so long as I have enough expenses to get me through the next month, I am entitled to take up to 50% of what's over and above that. That's great. That's fantastic. If you need that more often, you say, I will look at this once a month. And as long as I have expenses for the next month, I get a profit distribution. If you know you need a certain amount to live, to pay your rent, you can say all owners get $2,000 a month. But then that's up to you to make sure that you can meet that, because you're creating a contract with yourself. You're agreeing to pay yourself. So these are ways that you determine how you distribute profit. You can put set numbers, or you can put judgment calls and some limitations around yourself if you're not really sure where that is. How to resolve disputes. If there's multiple members and you have a disagreement, what happens? Who do you go to? This is always a good one to have before that happens. And then any other obligations between companies and members. So some examples might be if one of you is working on this really great program for kids and you want to make sure that you can take it with you when you leave. That might be something to put in the operating agreement. We asked about the public benefit. If there's a mission or vision that is really important to you, it should go in the operating agreement. So that's these contracts between yourself. Operating agreements can be amended. You can change them, but typically you want your operating agreement to be kind of a last you 3 to 5 years sort of thing. You don't want it to last you 20 years. Things are going to change, but you don't want to be changing it every couple of months. So what do you do with the things that change every couple of months? Those go in meeting minutes. That's where you do those day-to-day decisions of the company. So that's, like we said, buying the computer. If you elect an officer, so operating agreement, we say, I have permission to delegate the following tasks to an office manager. I have permission to elect a treasurer. And when I elect an officer or when I appoint an officer, they're set for 1-year terms and I have to renew them every year. They're set for 5-year terms, or they're set until they resign. Well, when you choose who that officer is, that you put in the minutes, because you don't want to have to amend that operating agreement if you change your officer. Same with addresses, names, anything that might change. Authority to make big monetary decisions, amendments to the operating agreement or other minutes. If you're approving anything that a third party might request. So if you know your insurance requests X from you every year, my insurance every year asks if we've changed anything with our members. So I know anytime we have new members, I need to put that in meeting minutes. They also ask if we hire new attorneys. That's something that's important to our insurance. So when we hire a new attorney, we put that in our meeting minutes. We'll also say anything that might help you with the paper trail. So if you have a trouble parent, I used to teach English in Korea. I taught elementary school. There was one parent who we had who my co-teacher and I would only do meetings together. And we would only do them in Korea. You have CCTV. So we would only do them where the CCTV could catch the entire conversation, because we knew that this was a trouble parent and that you wanted a paper trail. So if you have a parent, an employee, a situation where just gut is telling you paper trail is good, meeting minutes. At the end of the day, you just write down, on this date, I sat down and reviewed the case file of this child. I had the meeting with the parents. Here's what came out of that. Here are the follow-up action items. Sign, date it, put it all in a nice big binder. Keep it in a place. We call that a corporate book. It's all your corporate documents, all your Secretary of State documents. And then that way, if somebody is trying to sue you, going back to poor Susie and her parents, they can't do what's called piercing the corporate veil. So here's company, here's you, right? If they want to try and prove that you are not in fact a duck and you are a human being, they're going to try and pierce the corporate veil. This is where I use a lot of mixed analogies, so I apologize for this. We talked about the formalities as walls. This is when you want to think about the 3 little pigs. So the legal concept is called piercing the corporate veil. How easy is it to pierce a veil? Pierce a cloth. They're reaching through to you, pull you in. And now you're part of that lawsuit. You get that joint and several liability, even though you're an LLC. So if you, instead of having a veil, have walls of brick, because you've been doing a good operating agreement, you've been doing good meeting minutes, it's much harder to get you. And Dawn is absolutely correct. How you pay your bills matters for both. Don't be paying your house bill with your company funds. If you are using your home to conduct your business, and if you are using your car to conduct your business, think about this as if you're 2 separate people. What would you do if somebody else was running their business in your home? Aside from call the cops. You'd have a lease, right? Do a 1-page lease with yourself. Do a 1-page car rental policy. I use this portion of my home for my business. And therefore, I charge myself $200 rent every month. I use my car 60% of the time for my business. And therefore, I charge myself a $100 car fee every month. And then instead of paying your mortgage directly or your car lease directly or your insurance directly from your business, you pay your lease to yourself every month according to the rules that you've set. So that
We
Dawn
are
has-
not done talking about those bills, right? We will go into detail about that later. Like, we're gonna talk through some childcare type scenarios and stuff. And so don't worry, like, we get to have that conversation some more.
Awesome. So this is a good one to have, but yeah, think about it. So we have those 4 formalities, very simple, 4 walls. And when you're looking at those walls, you want to say, is this a veil? Or is this a straw wall? Or is this a stick wall? Or is this a brick wall? And we're aiming at that brick wall. So I am almost out of time. And so I just want to, you guys are going to get this. So I just want to leave on one note with written agreements, because we kind of talked a little bit about them, but these are also written agreements with your employees. If you are in a partnership, that's okay. You want to have a partnership agreement though. These are with your clients. These are with your vendors. What should you think about to protect yourself in these written agreements? And I leave you 4 rules with this. These are more important than having an attorney draft your agreements, because I don't know what these are for you. I can guess, but I don't know what they are. What are your expectations for how this is going to work if things go right? What time do they pick up their kids? What time do they drop off their kids? Is there a snack time? Is there a nap time? Do they need to bring a change of clothes? What are their expectations? What time do they pick up their kids? What time do they drop off their kids? Do you call them if something goes wrong? At what point do you call them? Okay, expectations. Most issues that I see are from 2 sides to a contract having different expectations about what was going to happen and thinking that the other side shared their expectations. But because they never wrote it down, there was a miscommunication, and that's what has now happened. The 3 most likely things to go wrong, and again, think of yours and think of theirs. Most likely things to go wrong. Well, these days, somebody caught COVID. It's very likely to go wrong. What's going to happen if that's the case? Put it in your contract. Check bounces. That happens. What happens if a check bounces? What happens if they don't pay you? What happens if they're late to pick up their kids? So what are the things that aren't crises, but are kind of the small things that go wrong from a day-to-day perspective? Cover them in the contract. 3 things that keep you up at night. Meaning, what are your biggest concerns here? Not the biggest concerns that can happen. Not the end of the world scenario. But I said, you know, similar to in your operating agreement, what happens if you're out for 6 weeks? You catch COVID, or you get hit by a bus, or you break your leg skiing, hopefully something fun if you've broken your leg, and you can't be there for 6 weeks. What happens? What happens if they don't show up to pick up their kid and it's now 8 p.m. It's well after when they were supposed to, and you can't reach them? These are the crisis scenarios. You don't have to cover all of them, but if it's keeping you up at night, include it in. If you think it's keeping them up at night, include it in. And then the catch-all, what happens if something goes wrong? Can we end the contract? Do I ask you not to come back? Do I give you a warning period? Do we sit down with a third-party mediator? That's your catch-all. What's the process for when something inevitably happens we haven't thought about? If you have these things in your written agreements, you will be well protected, whether or not an attorney drafts them. That's kind of my, like I said, I'll give this all to Hannah. So the slides we didn't touch are more things that I did touch other places, just not very specifically. If you have specific questions, feel free to reach out for a consult with me. But before you guys jump into insurance, any questions? You guys have been a great group.
We're tired.
They're so tired.
Yeah. Any questions, you guys? Here's the great part. Like, if you come up with something and you're like, I wish I would have asked her. Remember, 0. 0 to go schedule an appointment with Sam and ask her. So there you go. Thank you, Sam. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. And I'll send this to Hannah tomorrow so everyone has it.
Great. Thanks, Sam.
Wonderful. Have a good one.
You too.
Now, Katie. Katie is here to share with us the world of insurance. So listen closely, get your questions ready, and make sure that you guys are covered to sustain and protect your business. Thanks, Katie. You're muted.
Tapping it to speak. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's going to
Okay.
be the most used phrase now, right? You're muted. It has to be the most used phrase in the nation. So
Exactly. Okay, so I'm just going over insurance at a very basic level. There's all sorts of things that we could talk about, but I'm just going to go over the nitty gritty that you really should have. And then I'll go over a few that you might want to have depending on your situation. I've been in insurance for, oh God, over 30 years now. So, and I'm an independent agent, which means I work for multiple companies versus someone like State Farm who just works for one company. Anyway, so these are the coverages that, in my opinion, a daycare must have. The first one is general liability, and you have to have it at a 1 million, 2 million limit. That's a standard limit anyway. An agent probably would never quote it for under that. And then part of that general liability needs to have assault and battery. It'll either be included or they'll do a separate limit for 1 million. That is not that I think any of you are going to do assault or battery or sexual misconduct in your business, but you'd be amazed at how many people get accused of it. And it's very expensive just to get accused of it. And then non-owned and hired auto at $1 million combined single limit. And what that covers you is if you have an employee who's driving their car to run errands for you. So this isn't if you're transporting the kids. This is just if you have somebody like run into the bank for you or to the grocery store or something like that. If they get in a car accident in their car, you are also going to get named in that lawsuit. Next is coverages you must have if you have employees. Okay, so the first one is workers' comp, and that the state limit is 1 million per occurrence, 500,000, or 1 million per injury, 1 million per disease, 500,000 per disease policy limit. It's very inexpensive to just increase that to 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, which is what I normally do. It's like $120 a year to increase it for most companies. And then the other one is employment practices liability. I would say you need to have 50,000 minimum of coverage for that. Higher is better. You should try to get up to 1 million as fast as you can. And what that covers you for is if someone accuses you of doing something, either, well, it can be that you made a pass at them or something like that, or you hired them or did not hire them or did not give them a promotion or fired them for any of the protected classes, which are things like sexual orientation, race, religion, creed. Those are the main ones. Be careful if you're hiring people as subcontractors or contract laborers. It's very hard in the work comp arena to do this. You cannot pay them by the hour. You can't supervise them. You can't give them equipment or tools. You can't train them. You can't pay them. You can't pay a specific person. You have to pay a company. So they have to be like Jane Smith, and then they have to have a DBA, Smith Daycare. Then you actually have to write the check to Smith Daycare. It's very, very hard. I don't think you could possibly have a subcontractor in a daycare situation. If you do, you're probably setting yourself up to a whole another lawsuit because you have people working with children that aren't your employees. So it just doesn't work. If you are transporting children in a vehicle, then you need to have business auto policy with a combined single limit of $1 million minimum. but that's only if you're actually going to transport the kids in your cars. If you're taking credit card payments or keep any personal and or health information on the children, the parents, or your employees, you also need to have cyber liability insurance. There's many kinds of coverage. There's many limits. You need to have at least $250,000 in coverage in that. But if you have that exposure, you need to talk to me separately because it's very complicated and everyone is their own scenario. So no two people are exactly the same on what you need. Property coverage. This covers your business personal property use for the daycare. If you own a building, it will also cover the building. It also covers loss of business income. And what that is let's say you have a daycare in your home, you have a fire, and you have to relocate the daycare. Maybe it's going to take you 2 months to relocate it. So this would pay you for your loss of income for those 2 months while you're trying to find a new place to hold your daycare. And then let's say at your current daycare center, you pay $2,000 a month rent. And at the new place, it's going to be $2,500 a month. Well, they will pay a certain amount of months, that difference between the 2,000 and the 2,500. So they'll pay your 500 for you. That's called an extra expense. And every policy is different, but many coverages will cover you for up to a year from the loss for that. So those are important coverages. If you are running your daycare out of your home, you need to have a business use endorsement added to your policy. And they may be able to add the business personal property onto your homeowner or renter's policy. So it's very important you ask them. But if you don't have that endorsement, you may not even have homeowners insurance or renter's insurance, because many policies say if you are running a business out of your home and you don't tell us, there is no coverage. Okay, so it's very important to talk to whoever writes your homeowners and or renters insurance and ask them if you can indeed with their policy run a business, and if you can they cover it. I think State Farm will cover, I think it's up to 8 children if you have a daycare with up to 8 kids. So that would be a very inexpensive to get coverage. An inexpensive way to get coverage is if you have State Farm. Possible coverages you may need are things like miscellaneous professional liability, umbrella excess liability, crime. But I mean, I don't want to go into what all those are. I mean, excess insurance, all it does is raise your limit. So if you have $1 million general liability and you have $1 million excess liability, now you have $2 million worth of coverage. And it's very inexpensive, a few $100s to add another $1 million. So, you know, what I tell people is buy the insurance as you can afford it. Most of the coverages are not required legally, depending on where you're getting your daycare license. Some counties do require it, some do not. Workers' comp, if you have employees, it's required, period. That's a state law, and you can't claim bankruptcy if somebody gets hurt and you didn't cover work comp. They will go after you forever for that. So that's insurance really in a nutshell, and about as basic as you can get. So I'm sure, I mean, if you have questions, let me know. Okay, Angie Grace, yes, you can contact me as an agent. Yes, I'm taking new clients.
I was going to put this in the chat, but I'm curious about home providers with a large license. So that would give you 12 children with an assistant teacher when you get to the 9th.
Okay. So at that point, then you definitely have to have workers' compensation. You really probably need the same limits. But once you're getting more kids, I would, look more seriously at an umbrella, because if there was, an unfortunate incident at your daycare center, you would have more children that you're liable for. So, and you're going to probably have more underwriting guidelines the more kids you have. Not probably, you are going to have more underwriting guidelines. And they start wanting to know more about, are you doing fire drills with the kids? Are you, do you have more than one easement out of the building? Things like that.
Hey, Katie. Question I had, sometimes it's confusing whenever insurance comes up for renewal. Can you real quick explain like the different layers where there's like a provider, a carrier, an agent?
Sure. So okay, so it depends on the situation, but most daycare centers, most of the standard companies are getting out of writing daycares. So you're having to go to what's called an excess and surplus lines market. So if you're going into an excess and surplus lines market, you're going to have your agent is your first layer. Okay. And then that agent is going to go to a broker. And that broker is going to be someone like RT Specialty, Burns and Wilcox, somebody like that, Sweat. It's going to be names like that. That broker is then going to go to multiple insurance carriers and get quotes. Then those quotes are going to go back to the broker, who's then going to go back to the agent, who's then going to go back to the insured. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think so. And that's just kind of like pretty standard, like no other
Yes.
gotchas around that. Okay.
No, I mean, the only thing that you have to understand is when you're going with when you're going through an agent and then a broker, and you're getting what's called, like I said, excess and surplus lines quotes, there are two different kinds of companies. One are called admitted and one is called non-admitted. You will know if it's admitted because there will not be what's called a surplus lines tax charge on your policy. An admitted company is still regulated by the insurance commissioner of the state. Okay, so they still have to file their financials. They have to still show that they are financially sound, that they can pay the claims if a loss happens. They can't have a bunch of complaints to the insurance commissioner or they're going to lose their license. A non-admitted company is not regulated by the state. So whenever possible, you want to get coverage with an admitted carrier.
Okay, no, that's really good to know. The one other thing I really wanted to ask about was, I know for home insurance, buying and selling houses, like you get pretty used to like, okay, there's certain codes, the terminology is very fixed. I don't know if it's fixed at the state level or national or by industry, but there's a lot of similar terminology. Now, in this kind of like liability and stuff, like I'm looking at my policy, there's class codes and endorsement codes. And how standard are those?
The class codes are very standard. Okay. There is a plain and simple a daycare class. Okay. Some companies might have two daycare classes, one for in-home and one for a daycare facility, but that's it. I mean, there's two classes. Endorsement codes can be very different by company. It's kind of what I tell people is look at the endorsement. If you are charged for it, there's probably some real coverage there that you might use. If you are not charged for it, it is coverages that the company is giving you for free because they never think you're actually going to have a claim on those. So they're not as important is all I'm saying. So, everybody gives you lock and key replacement. No one ever files a claim to get their keys replaced. Okay. It just doesn't happen, but almost every policy has that coverage, but nobody's going to ever use it. That's why they give it to you for free. But things like backup and sewer and drain that you're going to get charged for, that's important to look at because it's going to be at different limits and that can be a huge claim and the coverages can vary. So it depends on what you're looking at. I mean, and I'm, if anyone wants to send me their policies, I'll look at it and I will tell you, here's your problems, and or hey, you're great. You have no problems. You're, you know, or I'll tell you, you know, ask your agent to increase your this coverage to this.
Okay.
You know, and
Yeah,
there's all types of coverages on the additional and benefits that can and cannot be important depending on, for instance, the age of your building. If
Mhm.
you have an older building, it's very important that you have coverages for increased cost of construction, demolition, and well, there's three different kinds of increased cost of construction. So one covers if only part of the building's damaged and you have to tear down the whole building. One covers for debris removal, which debris removal can be very expensive. So like all that stuff that is not like a mattress that is not hazardous waste when it's a mattress sitting there. As soon as it catches on fire, it's now hazardous waste. So those things are really important to look at, and especially if you're in an older building. Okay, increased cost of, and if you either A, rent the building on a triple net lease, especially because on a triple net lease, you're responsible for that building usually. Or if you or you own the building and it's older. And one of the things that really gets to people is what's called increased cost of construction. And what that is when your building was built under one code and now it's a new code. And so you have to have the coverage to bring it to code. Okay. That can be very expensive. So that's an important coverage if you are E or A in a triple net lease, or B, you own the building and it's over 10 years old. So that's why it's not a one fit answer. Depends on the policy and depends on your situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And then there's some things that when you're looking at an agent that you need to make sure you need to ask them in writing, and they need to answer you in writing to how they handle this. The first one is, how do they answer it if you forget to pay your premium? So everyone has this false sense that there's a grace period on your premium. I'm telling you right now, there's no grace period. You don't pay your premium, you're getting canceled. Okay. They will give you 10 days notice of cancellation. That's 10 mailing days. In today's mail, you may never get it. Okay. Most agents get it emailed to them, so they aren't relying on mail. Okay. I can tell you, I live in a small town, Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Craig, Colorado is a 55-minute drive. It could take me 2 weeks to get something from Craig mailed to me. That's ridiculous. Or I could get something from Denver in a day. You never know. Who wants to count on the US Postal Service right now? Most agents, I would say probably 85% of agents, will not call you anymore and say, hey, you're late on your payment. I'm sure that was an oversight. Can you get it paid? And then you will cancel. And guess what? They also won't notify you when it's canceled. They'll mail you or email you the cancellation, but they're not going to call you and go, hey, by the way, you're not insured anymore. If it's for non-payment, they're not going to tell you. Okay. That's one thing. You need to make sure that they will notify you if you were late. Look, that happens to everybody. Just like, I mean, you should all be set up for auto pay for your premiums so that you don't have this happen because of the mail system. But if you're still sending checks to your insurance company, checks get lost in the mail. And you need to make sure that if this happens, if you have an accident or, okay, sometimes people try to play the game and are late all the time. Okay. And eventually even I will tell you, I'm not holding your hand anymore. Pay your damn stuff on time. Either or I'll tell you, go on auto pay, or I'm not calling you anymore because I don't have time to call you every month because you're late every month. But most agents won't even call you the first time you're late. So that's the first thing you need to check with. And then the other thing is you need to have your agents that are willing to read your contracts. They're not there to give you legal advice. We are not lawyers. All we're doing is looking at your contracts and saying, if your contract is broader than your insurance. Okay. So, or do you have all the coverage? And this happens a lot with triple net leases. People do not understand what a triple net lease does. And many times they do not understand that they actually have to have coverage on the building. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. So they'll sign a triple net lease, not realizing that they actually have to pay for and purchase the building insurance. Well, if you have an agent that can look at your lease for you and go, oh, okay, here's your problems. You know, and then sometimes the leases ask for things that are uninsurable, like a flood without a flood policy. Well, sorry, that isn't insurable. But at least then you have an agent telling you this cannot be insured for this part of your lease. And this part of your lease you're fine with. And this part of your lease you can have it, but you don't have it right now. If they won't do that for you, find another agent.
Thank
And
you.
then
Thank you.
I'm gonna look at your chat questions because I think I saw some. What is, Michelle, what's your horror story?
I will just say one thing I learned is write down or track somewhere when your own yearly renewal is. So I had a liability insurance company at this point, I can't even remember who it was. That broker or that agent was bought out. And so basically when all those files were transferred over to the new owner,
Mhm.
mine kind of got lost in the shuffle somewhere. And so that agent never called me to say, hey, time for your renewal. I got to come collect money, sign a new contract for the year, yada, yada. Did not do that. I of course, like I feel like every other busy human didn't even think twice when I hadn't heard anything, you know, I guess, you know, a year and a half, that all just meshes all together. And all of a sudden, actually one day I was like, geez, I have not been contacted for my renewal and to make payment. I feel like it's been a really long time. And so it turns out actually I had been without, very scary, without liability insurance for at least 6 months.
So the first thing I would say on that is maybe you were without it and maybe you weren't, because you might have had it on the agency, you know. So if something had happened, you know, as an agent, you are responsible to contact your insureds, you know, if for renewal.
Right.
So I'm guessing you are with Nexus and surplus line carrier, because if you'd been with the standard carrier, it would have just automatically renewed.
Right.
So excess, and you're right, excess and surplus lines, they do not auto renew and they don't have to notify you. That's one of those things where I said, watch out for the ones that aren't regulated. So, yeah, I mean, you definitely should diary, or, you know, well, that's what we call it, but suspend, whatever you want to call it, put it on your calendar 30 days out before you renew. If you haven't heard from your agent, call them.
Yeah, I have a better track of that now.
And
So
at
that's
least
just
30 days, and at least 30 days.
yes.
Because if you've had any issues with your insurance, it could take 60 days to find you insurance.
Yes.
Like if you've had a claim, or you have an older building that isn't sprinklered and is frame, or, you know, there's just situations where it can be harder to find insurance. I mean, it shouldn't be really hard, but there are instances where it can be hard. So, you know, and I mean, I can tell you with my surplus and excess care or excess renewals, I definitely have talked to them within 30 days of their renewal. Depending on what they do, I may have talked to them 90 days out. You know, I write some marijuana risks, and those I will have talked to them 90 days out because they're harder to place. But a daycare, I definitely would have talked to you within 30 days of your renewal. And them selling their agency is not really an excuse. I've been through that. That's not really an excuse. They just dropped the ball, period. It doesn't matter why they dropped it. They dropped it.
Yeah, it was awful. It was not good. So it's just an experience I share so that everyone.
Yeah, and that also makes you harder to
thinks.
insure
Yeah.
because
Oh,
you
it
had a
was.
lapse in coverage. You probably had a rate increase.
I did. Lucky me, right?
Mm-hmm. And that I probably would have argued with the agency. You know, it may not have done you any good, but I would have tried arguing it.
Yeah, I was kind of just very panicked. Like, oh my God, I would never purposely go without insurance. And I was thanking God nothing had happened because, you know, like I said, based on renewal, I had been without for a good 6 months. It was very concerning to me. Really
Yeah.
panicked. I was like, oh my gosh, I must have something paid and in place today.
Yeah, and you probably couldn't get it that fast.
No, it was next day because it took them
Yeah.
time, you know, to get it all figured out. It was a mess. So I just share it so that people, because I heavily rely on that, you know, like, oh, you're up for renewal. They come get my money, take my money. I sign a contract. I rely on that. And that, turned out not to work. So,
Right. No, that's good advice. I mean, we're human, so agents make mistakes too. But normally they'll take responsibility and, you know, like call the company and be like, oh, come on. Like they won't backdate for 6 months, but at least try to get them to not give you a rate increase if it's partially the agent's fault. But yes, we
Now
can
that
make
Katie's
mistakes
gonna
too.
give you the straight talk about your insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have these things nagging you in the back of your brain about your business and you go, that insurance stuff is over here in a pile, and you just keep avoiding looking at it, pick it up. You have Katie's information right there. Get in touch with her and have her look at it with you. She understands it inside and out and can help you feel more confident in what you're doing.
And just know that no question is a stupid question. You know, I have to take insurance. I have to take insurance classes every year. Okay. I had to take a ton to get my license, and then I have to take more every year to keep my license. So there aren't, and insurance changes a lot. You know, I mean, 10 years ago, I could have written a daycare for $350 a year. I guarantee you I could not write it for that now. Not even close. But so that's what I'm saying. I mean, insurance changes, and so there's no, don't ever feel like you're asking me a stupid question, because you're not.
Okay, I've got a question.
Okay.
I've got general liability, I've got business use endorsement, I've got property business. I hope to have an employee very soon, which means I will have workers' comp. If I fall in my garage and hurt myself, do I have any coverage for myself?
Not right now, you don't. When you buy your workers' comp, you can cover yourself on it. So it will be based on, I think 63,000 a payroll is what I can look it up, but I think it's 63,000 this coming year. So that means whether you make $1 or you make 63,000, you pay the same amount. Okay. It's called a minimum maximum payroll for an owner, but a daycare rate isn't very high. So it shouldn't cost you that much to cover yourself.
Okay.
A few hundred a year to cover yourself.
Thank you.
Sure. And if you have health insurance, it may or may not cover you when you're at work. So don't count on that. You know, call your health insurance carrier and ask them, do I have 24-hour coverage, and am I covered for work-related injury?
Thank you. I will.
Because if you have work-related injury coverage, then you don't need to cover, well, Okay, work comp doesn't just cover for the injury. It also covers for lost wages, and it also covers for retraining. And then if you're really seriously hurt, it can cover for disability. So, you know, if you don't have a disability policy, and even if you have health insurance, you still might want to get yourself covered on workers' comp. You should at least get it quoted. What's it hurt to get a quote?
Sure.
You can always say no.
And here's the deal, you're gonna have sustainability funds in about a month's time, right? That can help with some of your costs. Like you can, if they're not gonna let you use it for this, you can offset other costs. Like you can get this in place if you don't have this in place.
Separate is
Hey, what-
no. Yeah, so Lily asked if our center closes for COVID, is payroll for staff covered by insurance? No, it is not. Well, unless you want to call unemployment insurance.
Okay,
Yeah,
guys,
COVID's been a real bummer.
yeah,
under many
Right.
ways.
from like
but
chapter 3 of that, or I don't know, chapter 30, or
yeah, yeah.
it's pretty old.
There basically is no insurance coverage for COVID of any kind. Okay, so you're not going to get loss of income for COVID. You're not going to get, you know, the only payout that I have heard of for COVID was Wimbledon, because Wimbledon had a special event policy that covered a pandemic.
Wow.
So they got millions. They got 23 million, I think, for canceling Wimbledon one year. But that's the only payout I know of that has happened with COVID.
Well, thank you, Katie. I really appreciate you coming and sharing all of this information. You guys have her contact information, and Hannah will make sure everything's in the email tomorrow. So get in touch with her and get those nagging questions out of your brain and get rid of that insurance pile over there that you're not touching, right? Pick it up, be proactive. This is the week for you to be proactive on this, okay? Take action. So
All righty,
Thanks so
well,
much.
everybody have a good evening.
Thank you very
take
much.
care.
Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you.
Katie.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
So you guys, I have made a commitment to try and make sure that we definitely have that group time, because I know you've been valuing that group time. So we're going to break out in groups until 8:20. So it's 8:02. So remember, when your clock approaches 8:20, it's going to grab you and yank you out of that room. So just know that that's coming. So Hannah's going to do her magic thing. Okay, guys. Can you believe this is week 5? Next week is 6. That's it. Like next week is our last week, which is crazy to me. Maybe it was that break for Thanksgiving that makes it feel so short. So really, we're going to need to talk, and maybe we do it next week, right? We really need to talk about some of those budget issues and stuff. Did you guys have the opportunity to go in and look at the budget forms that were in last week's stuff? Some yes, some no. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, it's a good idea to, if you can grab some time, go do that this week, right? We need to talk about how you pay for stuff, and there's there are similarities between centers and homes, but there are also some very distinct differences, right? So we'll need to talk about those a little bit. What else do you need to hear from us next week that we haven't covered yet that you were anticipating?
Dawn, I have a question about what you brought up earlier, and I don't know if I missed it, and I'm tired and in my
Fine.
own land.
So
You brought up the shines points, and I know I got an email on it too, but I'm blanking it out. So I know we get credit in PDIS for the training hours, correct?
Right.
Okay, and then to get our shines, does that come just from the class, or class and
Nope.
consult?
So classes don't count in that, right? So here's the
Okay.
thing, you can get that kind of coaching from your councils and stuff too, right? You can do that, and that's fine. Tony, they would probably even split it, right? Wouldn't they, if they did 2 hours through one, or would they want, do you know?
I'm not quite sure. I
That's
think
a
the
good
new group,
question.
you know, it has to be someone, and like I said, I don't even know if it's consultation with someone else in the Small Business Development Center, or does it have to
No,
be?
it's not. It's credentialed coaches.
For
So that,
early childhood?
so we just discovered that on Saturday because I was at the QRIS update training or whatever it was, right? And so we were like, wait a minute, like I'm a credentialed coach and I'm doing so we thought, well, you know what? This is something that we can make available to you. If you want to tap into that at any point, you just have to be clear with me when you meet with me, right? The first time, I want to do this, so that I can start documenting for you, because I want to make sure I do not want to have to go back after the fact. Like I'm going to have to be on top of my note taking and my work with you, so that I get things into the SBD system and I get you your paper the way it needs to be, so that it can be uploaded into Colorado Shines and Count. Any coach that has taken this class, as long as they've been a coach for 6 months, I think was the criteria and the framework, can go ahead and do the same thing. They can do those coaching hours with you as well, right? So during that class, we are encouraging them to make sure that more council coaches were attending these classes, so that they could have more people out there to provide these supports. It's a very frustrating, and we're going to advocate that any consultant, any business coach, right, that have these specializations that you guys do not, any of those hours should count for support for your business. And the fact that they don't is extremely frustrating. So we're going to be advocating for that. But in the meantime, I'm like, okay, let's do this thing, right? So we're just going to make that available to you. And like I said, nobody's expecting you to add this kind of stuff in before Christmas. We know it's a stressful time. Get some money coming into your program where you can breathe again, right? And start thinking, and then sit down and start working out how you want to do this. Because the fact of the matter is, when Build Back Better passes, and I did say when, it's going to change everything. And quality ratings are going to matter. Yes, Carol. Yep. For business related practices.
So if a credentialed coach has taken this class, they then can do those coaching logs for
Right.
someone.
Well,
For
I
the
For
would-
business
QRS.
related
I want to make
practices.
sure of that, because I mean, the council hasn't said that themselves. So I have an appointment with Rachel and the
Yeah.
state. And I want to know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want
Yeah.
to say this is going to work and then it doesn't. I mean, giving
Right.
false information is just not ECPAC's thing.
Right.
So-
Well, and Jake, what was it? Jake, what's his name? Charlie, right? Charlie was at the training on Saturday. And so he clearly said, yes, this would work under this criteria and stuff. So Tony, like confirmations of information is great, because how many times have we heard one thing and then
it happened the next
immediately
day.
an about face? So she will confirm all of that. I really hope that that's the case,
Well,
because I
here's
do
the
not
other
want to
thing.
be the only person in the
Is
state
that
that
I'm
can do
here
this.
every week for how many courses, but is that in my PDIS that I've taken the class? Absolutely
Oh, I
not.
know. Yeah, there's,
So
yeah, I
there's
know.
that little loophole also. So
Yeah.
I've attended many of these classes, but
Yep.
it's not in my PDIS. It's not part
Right.
of my credential. So therefore, I don't want to say
You don't
I.
want to undermine
that I
someone's
can't.
rating when it's
Right,
that sort
and
of
when it
thing.
comes down to your
Absolutely.
rating, every
And-
single point counts.
And I do not want to be the only person in the state doing this thing, right? Like, that's crazy. So,
What, Tony,
So-
that won't be in, oh, do you not have a PDIS? Is that why?
Oh, no, I do, but doesn't show up in PDIS that I show up to all these classes. I don't have
Right.
to register. I don't have to do the homework each time.
Oh, because you're
Um,
just coming
I'm
through
as
ECPA.
a support system, right? I'm just
Got
here
it.
to
Okay.
facilitate, answer questions, and be supportive. So
You
Interesting.
know who's been attending, right? Don't you report that to the state
Sure.
somewhere?
well, I don't personally.
I
No,
remember.
but Hannah,
I mean, do I know which of my providers that I've met through E&E or I do outreach with? I do a lot of outreach that I have asked to join, invited, shared Hannah's information. Those people.
no,
I know.
I'm just saying Hannah reports to the state the fact that you've been here for these trainings. So they do have somewhere where they know that. It's just
Which I
not in
guess
the
is
regular
why they're asking to
PDIS.
talk to me next week.
Yep. So here's the deal, like I need to hear from you guys. What else do you want to talk about next week?
Wait, so on Michelle's point, is there any way to put something in the Google Classroom when you have some sort of confirmation? Because I feel like we're coming into the end of week 5 and we didn't know that we should be getting consultation hours in order to get the shines points.
So here's the thing, like we just discovered that information on Saturday and it's something that is in place for you from here forward, right? You
Okay,
do
so
not
there's
have
no
to,
like deadline or anything?
no deadlines, nothing, right? No pressure to do it right now. There's none of that. We just like discovered like, hey, we have this additional feature that we can offer for you for support. So next year, sit down and really start thinking about when you want to do that, how you want to do that, what pieces do you want to focus on, all of that. And then you can use the same links to register with me and I'll make sure I have more calendar options for you guys available. Because this whole class thing, we're doing it again in January. So 4 more times next year, right? So yeah, we've got a whole other group to go through this with. So I will make sure to increase the number of spaces that I'm available for people to be able to access and do that. But come with like, here are the things I want to work on, right? So for next week, because it is 8:30 right now, I need to know like if there's something that's still burning in the back of your brain that you're like, I want to talk about this. Will you please let Hannah know so she can relay that information to me? Okay, and I'll go through some stuff and see if I can pull some things out just in case, because you guys are awfully quiet lately.
My vote would be for handbook policies.
I hope you guys
Handbook policies.
your small group because you're so quiet in the large group. So I really hope you break out. You have lots to say.
And if you
Back
do,
more chatty, so I think they were talking just fine, right?
if you do think of ideas or questions that you still have that you'd like us to cover, you can either send me an email or you can put it in the classroom in the stream, the little discussion boxes there. Either way works for that.
And you'll alert me to that if they do that. Because I'm not in there. Thank you.
If you're out in Adams County and you have questions, please reach out. I am more than willing to sit down and talk.
Thank you.
So you guys are amazing. It's tough right now. You have to hang in there one way or another. Okay. Do not give up on anything, especially when money's coming. Some help and relief is coming. So let's take a breath and step out and do good things for the remainder of this month. I will see you guys next week. Hannah's going to do her follow-up emails tomorrow with all the information from tonight. Let her know if you have questions and we will see you next week.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.